Voltammetry is used to measure the current produced by the oxidation or reduction of a species in a solution. Titration is a commonly used analytical method for determining the concentration of a solution. It involves the gradual addition of a standard solution of known concentration to a solution of unknown concentration, until a chemical reaction occurs, typically signaled by a color change, known as the endpoint. The amount of standard solution required to reach the endpoint is used to calculate the concentration of the unknown solution. There are various types of titrations, including acid-base titrations, redox titrations, and complexometric titrations. Acid-base titration. Acid-base titration is a common method used to determine the concentration of an acid or a base in a solution. In this type of titration, a standard solution of known concentration is slowly added to the solution of the unknown acid or base until the endpoint is reached. The endpoint is typically determined by a color change, which occurs when the acid or base has been neutralized. For example, in the titration of hydrochloric acid with sodium hydroxide is slowly added to the hydrochloric acid until the solution becomes neutral. The neutralization reaction produces water and a salt. HCl plus no NaCl plus H2O. The amount of sodium hydroxide required to reach the endpoint is used to calculate the concentration of the hydrochloric acid. Redox titration. Redox titration is a method used to determine the concentration of a reducing or oxidizing agent in a solution. In this type of titration, a standard solution of a known oxidizing or reducing agent is slowly added to the solution of the unknown reducing or oxidizing agent until the endpoint is reached. The endpoint is typically determined by a color change or by the measurement of the potential difference between two electrodes. For example, in the titration of iron 2 with potassium permanganate is slowly added to the solution of iron 2 until the solution turns pink. The endpoint is reached when all the iron 2 has been oxidized to iron 3. 2No4 plus 5 Fe2 plus 16 hours plus 2 Mn2 plus 5 Fe3 plus 8 H2O. The amount of potassium permanganate required to reach the endpoint is used to calculate the concentration of the iron 2 solution. Complexometric titration. Complexometric titration is a method used to determine the concentration of metal ions in a solution. In this type of titration, a chelating agent, such as ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid, EDTA, is slowly added to the solution of the metal ions until the endpoint is reached. The endpoint is typically determined by a color change. For example, in the titration of calcium ions with EDTA is slowly added to the solution of calcium ions until the solution turns blue. The endpoint is reached when all the calcium ions have been complexed with EDTA. Ca2 plus EDTA4C2. The amount of EDTA required to reach the endpoint is used to calculate the concentration of the calcium ions. Chromatography is a powerful separation technique that is widely used in analytical chemistry and biochemistry. It involves the separation of a mixture into its individual components based on differences in their physical and chemical properties.